The Denver Broncos answered the biggest question facing the franchise in the last 9 years. Who's the franchise quarterback? We know Bo Nix is that guy, but now that he is in that position as the franchise quarterback, what does it look like behind him in terms of his backup? We'll highlight that and much more here on today's episode, Locked On Broncos.
You are Locked On Broncos, your daily Denver Broncos podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Broncos Country, what's happening? Welcome into another episode, Locked On Broncos, your daily Denver Broncos podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where you know it is your team every day. If you want daily Broncos news, content coverage, analysis, and more when there's things happening in the offseason, when there's things that aren't necessarily happening in the offseason, but you want fresh conversation, this is the place to be. So become an everydayer and a first listener if you haven't done so already, wherever you get your podcasts. We're available on YouTube. I'm Cody Roark, Broncos beat reporter from Mile High Sports, joined as always by Sayre Bedinger, site expert over there at predominantlyorange.com. And look, Broncos Country, here's what we got in store for you here on today's episode of the show. We're going to wrap things up by talking about how do the Broncos address the quarterback position behind Bo Nix in the offseason. Notice how I said behind Bo Nix versus how do they address the quarterback position. It's a nice feeling to be able to have that conversation. We'll also talk about who will be the backup for Bo Nix in 2025 for Sean Payton and this Broncos offense. And more importantly, we're going to kick things off by recapping the year. What did the Broncos learn? They learned that Bo Nix was the franchise guy. You're going to get that on today's episode of the show here, brought to you by our friends over there at Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Sayre, the carousel has finally stopped, my friend. We no longer have to see that doomed graphic when you're watching a game. When we look at this overview for the quarterback position in 2024, really coming into the season, the conversation was, can the Broncos figure out if Bo Nix can be the franchise guy? Well, we got that question answered, and he is that guy. The Broncos believe that he is that guy, and the fan base, they believe he's that guy as well. So that question has been answered.
One of the best rookie years for a quarterback in NFL history. I mean, you look back, Justin Herbert's 31 passing touchdowns, a rookie record was challenged by Bo Nix at 29, even though Bo didn't throw his first touchdown until week 4 against the New York Jets. And so there was a lot to be positive about over the course of this rookie season. And he played through the transverse fractures in his back, and obviously, he was the offense for the team, as you and I have talked about previously. Like Bo Nix, he was the leading rusher in 1/3 of this team's games. He put the offense on his shoulders in moments, big moments when needed, like the game against Kansas City. I know it didn't go Denver's way in Kansas City, but Bo Nix, the way that he was able to put the team on his back. You talk about big time drives like against Los Angeles, in Los Angeles. I know it didn't turn out the way Denver wanted to, but I mean, Bo Nix did his part in that game. He did his part to get them an 11-point lead into the second half. And then Cincinnati just responding to every time Joe Burrow and the Bengals would score. Like, how frustrating was that for Cincinnati's defense? And Cody, look, we know that the Broncos played a huge spoiler role for a number of teams like the Jets. I think you looked at that game against Denver as, man, we've got a clean house. So I think Bo Nix did his part to prove, like, in a variety of ways, on the field, off the field, he's the face of this franchise going forward.
And that's the number one thing you wanted to figure out in 2024. And I think everything else that transpired here for the Broncos, a 10-7 record, the first postseason appearance since 2015. Those are just like little sprinkles on top of the ice cream at this point here. But now you have security, because you and I did an episode yesterday really highlighting what the Broncos offense and defense, what they could have learned from the NFL divisional playoffs over the weekend. And one of the biggest things that we highlighted was that luckily Denver's already got this one answered, is you have to obviously have a quarterback first and foremost. Then, you have to have a running back. You have to have, some dogs in the passing game, so on and so forth here. But the thing that I think we saw just for Bo was his consistent level of growth on a week-to-week basis. And all the questions that we had as to, can he become the guy? Can he showcase that he's a franchise quarterback? He answered that relatively quickly. Look, I think the first 2 weeks of the season were rough, but I think it was really kind of after that Atlanta Falcons game, or even after that, I think mainly the Kansas City Chiefs game where they lost on the blocked field goal, where you and I sat here as dejected and heartbroken for the Broncos country over the end result of that game. We sat here and said, you know what? The Broncos, they have the guy that can face off against Mahomes and potentially win. Like they've got a guy who can do just that. The sky is the limit, the potential, everything's there. That answered right there that he is going to be their franchise quarterback. And then obviously he had some games down the stretch where it's like, yep, he's the guy. And look, everyone believes that too. Even the national media people believe that. Some of the more logical, level-headed voices, not these little TikTok dancing dudes who don't know football. Don't take their word for it. Take the people who played the game. Take the people who don't have to rely on hot takes or clickbait in order to have good conversation about a player and a prospect. That's, I think, one thing that we learned about that. For me, also looking back at the quarterback room in 2024, I felt it was very interesting, especially in training camp. You and I were sitting here wondering who's going to win the backup quarterback job. Like, how many quarterbacks are the Broncos going to keep on their active roster? They ended up keeping 3, and they kept Jarrett Stidham. They kept Zach Wilson on the 53, which I found to be interesting because maybe you could have made an argument for another player at another position to maybe take up one of those spaces. But I felt like Denver actually maneuvered their practice squad moves pretty well. They were able to put some guys in there and rotate them in onto the 53 and then off and so on and so forth, clear waivers. They were able to do that. So that was, I think, a testament to maybe the coaching staff and obviously the front office of being able to smartly maneuver and build this roster. But now I think it really is like, all right, what did we learn about the Broncos QB position behind Bo Nix in 2024? Well, Sayre, luckily, for the first time in a long time, the Broncos only had to play one quarterback all season long. How long has it been since we've been able to actually say something like that here on the show?
I mean, I don't think we've ever said that here on the show, have we? I mean, it's been since 2014. I think Peyton Manning played every game that season. But other than that, you've had multiple different guys play. Maybe Trevor Siemian in 2016. I don't remember if anybody else played that year.
No.
But I don't know. So
it was nothing like what we saw from Bo, though.
No, it was absolutely nothing. I mean, Broncos country, for reality's sake here, Cody, we've never had any young quarterback play like this. Like I said, it was a historically good rookie quarterback season, but as far as Denver Broncos history, like the best rookie year for a Denver Broncos quarterback as a rookie ever. So I think there's something to be said for that. And for the backup position, what we know about Sean Payton is like, his philosophy is, as what he said about Zach Wilson, like, we want to make you millions. And that benefits everybody. It benefits the quarterback. It benefits your team because you might get compensatory picks or somebody might want to trade for your guy. And you raise the floor behind your quarterback in the event that, as we've said before, I think in 2023, I think like 60 some odd quarterbacks played. You and I talked about that this past offseason. It's a huge deal to have an elevated, player in your look at the Miami Dolphins. Their season was done for early in the year because Tua got injured. You have to have a backup who can play. And ideally, I think you would have somebody who can, you want to say, hey, I want to go make this guy millions. Like, he's got upside. Like Teddy Bridgewater made $63 million after playing for Sean Payton. Jameis Winston made a bunch of money after playing for Sean Payton. And I think that philosophy really helps because what did Sean Payton say when they were evaluating quarterbacks for the draft? He's like, basically, we feel like we can do this better than most teams, if not everybody else, right? And so because of that, I think that extends into your backup spot where you want to have somebody that's worth developing, somebody who can play and start extended periods if need be, and marrying that combination, which leads to those reclamation project types of guys.
Well, and I think so much of it too is not only just making sure you have the right QB, but I also think you have to have the right coaching staff. Look, Sean Payton, going back to that quote, to be able to say that, and now it's like, look what Bo Nix was able to do. It's like, all right, Sean's got some bragging rights in terms of that because they are good at being able to do just that. They're able to see something in players that maybe not a lot of people did. Like, you look at every NFL draft expert or the TikTokers are like, oh yeah, Bo Nix didn't even have a first round grade, all this stuff. And it's like Sean Payton said, that stuff didn't matter to us. We don't care about that. We care about what we see and what we know and how we can evaluate players, which goes to show coaches for the most part. And look, every year there's always teams that maybe reach. You look at, I think you go back to Hard Knocks this offseason, the New York Giants look absolutely silly. The GM does he's got a son who's a kid and probably was like, hey, trade up and go get Jaden Daniels. And he's like, nah, like, we're in the business of winning. Like, we want to win games. It's like, dang, bro, that's going to live in infamy forever at this point. So maybe Joe Shane's son should probably make the decisions there for the New York Giants going forward. But everybody that wrote off Bo Nix, like Sean Payton's like, we don't care what everybody else had to say about him. We saw this guy. We saw the workouts. We threw everything at him, and he handled it well. I think having Davis Webb as a QB coach, I think that was a very underrated aspect of it. And so if Davis Webb, who's gotten some interviews for some coordinator jobs, and I even think he had a head coaching interview, if I'm not mistaken, with the New Orleans Saints, if he were to somehow leave, that would definitely, I think, who do you replace him with? Like, that would be a very big question here for the Broncos QB position room going forward here. And also for Bo Nix, because now you're bringing in a new coach. What does that look like? I'd be very curious to see how that maybe transpires here. But all that to be said here, as we look at the QB position now going forward, 2024, the QB position was a bright spot in Denver, which has not been said for a very, very long time in this franchise. But now the question will jump to, who will be the backup here for Bo Nix in 2025? Could it be a Zach Wilson or Jarrett Stidham, or could Sean Payton maybe reunite with one of his former quarterbacks that he had to be the backup behind the Broncos franchise QB? We'll take a look at that and much more here on today's episode, Locked On Broncos. Today's Locked On Broncos podcast is brought to you by our friends over there at the Game Time app. And I love going to live events, whether it's sports, music, theater, or comedy. One of my favorite memories, me and my fiance this past week, we went and saw an Avalanche game, and they won. She's a New York Rangers fan. I'm an Avs fan. I don't know too much about hockey, but I love going and enjoying the atmosphere. So I went as a fan. The Avalanche beat the Rangers. It's bragging rights. The energy and the excitement were unforgettable. Now Game Time has made it even easier to get tickets for your favorite events with their new feature, Game Time Picks. This feature filters out the fluff to show you only the incredible deals on great seats, so you don't have to waste time searching through thousands of tickets. And you can take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time here today. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off. Download Game Time today. What time is it? Game time.
The biggest question mark at the quarterback position for the Denver Broncos in 2025 has thankfully got nothing to do with the starting lineup, but the backup position, which we know is important. So it's got to be discussed because you know what, Broncos country, there's two free agents at that position in Jarrett Stidham and Zach Wilson. Can the Broncos bring one or both or either of those guys back? We're going to discuss that on today's episode. And if they don't, hey, who could they bring in? So Broncos country, if you haven't already done so, hit subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts on YouTube and things like that. Join the discussion with us. We appreciate every single one of you that makes us part of your day every single day, especially those of you that you throw us on in the car on your way to work, while you're working out. You got us in your algorithm. We appreciate you, and much love from Cody and I to you. And as we continue this offseason look at the quarterback position, Cody, it's really interesting to me because I kind of feel like the Broncos have the ideal backup quarterback already on, he was under contract this past year, but the ideal guy that you would want to have as Bo Nix is number 2. You and I were chatting about this. I feel like it's Zach Wilson. Now, do you agree with that? And why? Because I feel like Zach has all the traits and everything that you would look for in a high-end backup who's got experience that could play behind Bo Nix if need be.
Yeah, look, and I think what he was able to do, and his time in New York was very up and down. You saw the flashes and you saw the low moments there. And New York was not a place, as we've seen, the revolving door of coaches. We've seen the culture that was there at the New York Jets, how somehow players leave the Jets, coaches leave the Jets, they go on to have success elsewhere. So that to me speaks to a little bit of it being an environmental issue so far for a franchise like New York. But certainly, I think we saw a difference in Zach Wilson as the preseason came along. Certainly, he looked more confident. And just even talking to him a few times in the locker room this year, he just says he enjoys the locker room. Also, he's got great relationship with Bo Nix, with Jarrett Stidham, with Davis Webb. And he's in a position where I think this is probably going to be the most important thing when we talk about the backup quarterback job here. You mentioned the storylines about like Tua and his injury. We've seen it countless times in the last handful of years. Heck, even with Denver, even in 2023, when they benched Russell Wilson and Jarrett Stidham came in, the play style between those two guys was drastically different. In today's NFL, I even think too, we look at maybe Jaden Daniels. He's got a backup in Marcus Mariota who can do those things I think he does well, right? He can be the guy that does a read option. He keeps it and, can use his legs while also hitting the short to intermediate stuff. I don't know if Mariota can hit the deep stuff at a consistent rate the way that Jaden Daniels can in terms of accuracy and placement, but he's a backup quarterback that kind of fits the mold of your starter in a sense, right? You look at Lamar Jackson. I don't think there's anybody that can ever simulate what Lamar Jackson can do. Like if Lamar were to go down with an injury, who's the guy that's going to step up? They had Snoop Huntley who did it. And he was obviously playing at the level in which Lamar was, but he's got similar things where he can run the offense the same way. Denver needs a backup quarterback that can do the things that Bo Nix can, right? Like Bo has obviously got a bigger arm than most people had thought, that a lot of pundits had said. Bo's got the mobility, the athleticism. Zach Wilson got a powerful arm. He's got the mobility. He's got the athleticism to do it. Whereas I look at Jarrett Stidham, not necessarily as athletic as Bo or as Zach in terms of being able to use his legs when needed, doesn't have necessarily the biggest arm, is more of that, hey, the guy that's going to try to methodically get you down the field with some short to intermediate passes, maybe a shot here or there. Overall, if you're going to have a backup quarterback, he needs to be a similar trait style to your starting quarterback, because if your starter goes down, you can't change the foundation of the offense just because of that, right? And that, I think, is the dilemma that teams and coaches have when it comes to backup QBs, because it is hard in today's game to find almost an exact trait replica of the guy that you have.
Yeah, especially because if you have a quarterback that can run the ball well, it's impossible for you to bring in, let's say, your Mitch Trubisky for the Buffalo Bills, right? It's impossible for you as Buffalo to be like, look, this guy presents the exact same level of threat as Josh Allen as a runner, and so it just changes the whole dynamic of your offense. And the Broncos, I think they understand that. That's the great thing, is that I think they get it, that we need to have a high-end backup. Like Sean Payton has pretty historically always had a pretty high-end backup, Cody, at least within the last 10 years. I mean, you look at his acquisition of Teddy Bridgewater, Jameis Winston, those types of guys in New Orleans, and even kind of the fail-safe of Taysom Hill, where, look, Sean Payton is that type of guy that he's like, if we need to, like, I can run a completely different offense. It's not just that our offense is going to be hindered because of how different this quarterback is, but now you're going to have to plan for a completely different style of offense. And he's proven that he's capable of doing that with Taysom Hill. So kind of an interesting factor that, and a wrinkle that Sean and his coaching staffs through the years have added into the mix. But I'm with you. I think that it has to be somebody similar in terms of play style, and in this offense in particular, man, the quick passing game, that kind of thing is an area where a backup quarterback could come in and potentially thrive, as opposed to like we saw in the last game of the year against Kansas City, like where Carson Wentz, like, I mean, the Broncos just dominated those guys. Yeah. I feel like Denver has a situation where the offense is such that a backup quarterback could come in and reasonably be expected to have a measure of success if they need to play for any sort of extended period of time, which is why I would prioritize bringing Zach Wilson back.
Yeah, no, and I agree. I think Zach Wilson right now, if I had to sit here today and make a claim, I feel like Zach Wilson would probably be the best overall fit here for what Sean Payton wants to do in the event behind Bo Nix. And look, now here's the benefit that you get of that, right? Like, Sean Payton said, hey, we want to make you millions. Well, that could happen here in Denver. You can make millions. I don't know what the quarterback market's going to look like for backups, though I think that over the last couple of years, it's shown to be very fruitful in a sense. What was Jarrett Stidham's original deal? Do you remember at the top of your head?
2 years, like $10 million.
2 years, $10 million. You're telling me you can't give that to a Zach Wilson at this point? 2 years, $10 million. Now he's had a whole entire year in the system where he was this pretty much like when you're trying to prepare for, I think a team like the Buffalo Bills. The guy who represented that in terms of like when you're practicing against it was Zach Wilson for the Broncos defense. He's athletic. He's got the big arm. And look, he can move quick, and he's a little bit big. Like he's deceptively big and somewhat deceptively hard to bring down. To me, make your millions there with a guy who already knows your system versus you having to go out there in the free agency market and going on big. Though teams do this every year, but why make it harder for yourself and your coaching staff when you already have a guy who knows how you like things done, the process and everything else, the cadence of the snap count? Why go out and do that when you have that guy on your roster and a guy who maybe fits some of the traits that Bo Nix has, that if something were to happen to Bo, you can call in on Zach Wilson and he can do some of those things that Bo can in a sense. And look, not saying that he would be able to do it better or just as good as Bo, but when you look at play style, man, I tell you what, it kind of matches up between these two guys here.
Yeah, and I think that for Zach, I think him and his family love the fact that he's in Denver, right? I mean,
Yes.
I don't know them personally or anything like that, but being
Close
from
to Utah.
Utah, it's the ideal landing spot, more likely than not. And I'm sure back in 2021, if they would have had their choice back then, I'm sure he would have gone to Denver in the draft. But I know it's not just a one-track mind in free agency. There's other guys, you and I were talking about this before the show too, like who could the Broncos realistically add? Like if they want to go after a guy with a connection to Sean Payton, like Teddy Bridgewater, if he's still wanting to play, does he want to come back to Denver? I doubt it, but you never know. You could always bring Jarrett Stidham back. Heck, maybe after how well Jameis Winston played against Denver last year, Sean Payton's gonna be like, hey, come be part of our quarterback room this year. We don't want anything like that happening again this season. And I was looking at this too, Cody. Sean Payton had some glowing things to say back in the day about Mac Jones, who's a free agent. He said that he was someone they were really high on when he was with the New Orleans Saints, and specifically mentioned his decision-making and processing as strong suits in his game. So Mac Jones and that whole 2021 draft class are free agents. And if you're talking about reclamation projects, those guys are going to carry that label here in the 2025 offseason.
I would just say if they somehow brought in Mac Jones, all these little TikTok footballers that don't know football would go crazy with everything. They just said like, see, look, the comparison is there between Bo Nix and Mac Jones. I could just see that. It makes me want to puke just thinking about it. So we'll highlight that. So how do the Broncos address the quarterback position here in the offseason behind Bo Nix? Sayre and I are going to share our personal preference of Broncos Country. You're more than welcome to chime in as you do here, as always, here on Locked On Broncos. Today's episode of the show is brought to you by our friends over there at PrizePicks, and it's playoff time. And if you're like me or Sayre, you want to make the most of these final weeks of football action, and that is where PrizePicks comes in. Because if you love football and you want a chance to win real money while watching the games, PrizePicks is the place for you. It's the best way to turn your sports opinions into cash with daily fantasy player projections. With PrizePicks, you simply pick more or less on player stats like total passing yards, rushing touchdowns, for a shot to win up to 1,000 times your money, and you can make your picks in less than 60 seconds. And whether you're looking for a flex play to boost your payout or you want to cash out quickly, PrizePicks, they've got you covered. And with over 10 million members and billions in awarded winnings, it's clear the people are loving PrizePicks. And here's a special offer for Locked On NFL listeners. Download the app today. Use code Locked On NFL to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. That's PrizePicks. Run your game. Once again, download the app today. Use code Locked On NFL to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. PrizePicks. Run your game. The fourth quarter action on today's episode, Locked On Broncos, is here, and Broncos Country, even though the offseason is here, for the true fan, there is never an offseason. We've got you covered every single day with everything that you need to know about your favorite team, whether there's breaking news, coaching changes, roster shuffles, free agency previews, the NFL draft, the NFL combine, mock drafts leading up to the draft. Everything that you want, you're going to get it here, Locked On Broncos. So make sure you subscribe or follow wherever you get your podcast so you never miss out on what's going on with your favorite team from an objective point of view. Sayre, let's dive deep into answering this question here in Broncos Country. Obviously, as you're listening to the show, you can chime in as well. Send us your thoughts on social media or on YouTube. How do the Broncos address the quarterback position behind Bo Nix in the offseason? We kind of talked about who the backup situation really kind of being paramount here. We mentioned maybe what Sean Payton is looking for, maybe the pros and cons here. Let's take a look at a couple of options here. Would you, at this point, we'll go through a couple of series here. If it's between Jarrett Stidham and Zach Wilson, who are you bringing back and why?
Well, I'm taking Zach Wilson, Cody, because I think he's obviously younger. For Jarrett Stidham, he's going to have to go out there, and if he's going to start somewhere in the NFL, I mean, the clock is ticking. I think he's 27, 28 years old, so he's not old by any means, but he said last year when Bo Nix was named the starter, like he was a little miffed. He was a little ticked off because he believes he's a starter. That's not happening in Denver. And so I think Zach Wilson, just time is on his side, and that favors the Broncos as well because it gives you at least another year, I think, of a high upside backup quarterback. And that's what I think Zach Wilson is. Now, a lot of people get annoyed by this well, how does he have upside? He's been in the league since 2021. If he had any upside, he would already see it by now. I know, I get it. Like, it's definitive. He is a bust. He's never going to play well. Oh, what about like guys like Sam Darnold? What about guys like Geno Smith? What about it took Kirk Cousins at least 3 or 4 years to even get a semblance of looking good out there on a football field? So, Cody, I think that just people are so impatient nowadays. If you're not Malik Neighbors, if you're not, Jaden Daniels, you suck as a rookie. You're just not good. Like, that's what I can't stand. And so with Zach Wilson, I think that Sean Payton said it last year. He's the most unfairly hated quarterback in the NFL. I feel like that's a guy that Payton wants to have on his side. And so I would take him back in a heartbeat.
Yeah, I'm with you there. If I had to choose between one of those two guys, I would pick Wilson as well. And look, we have seen the flashes from heck. I mean, Broncos fans have seen it firsthand when he was a member of the Jets. Look, he had a mistake here or there, but he's beaten the Denver Broncos. And look, I always go back. The moment to me where my opinion on Zach Wilson really kind of changed here was a couple of years ago against Kansas City on Sunday Night Football. And he's out there and he's making NFL throw after NFL throw against Steve Spagnuolo's defense. And that Chiefs defense that year was pretty dang good as well. Unfortunately, they lost the game. It wasn't because of Zach Wilson. I was thinking to myself, I was like, all right, hey, maybe, you know what? Maybe the Zach Wilson kid, if he goes to a good environment, he can have success. And I think that Denver is a good environment. And I think, as you mentioned a little bit earlier, I think that the destination as a backup in Denver might be a very fruitful one for any player out there who's hoping to have a chance to maybe kind of add some value or add some intrigue to maybe their resume here. Because, I mean, you could see him play well in the preseason, and then all of a sudden now it's like at the trade deadline, teams are calling and saying, hey, what would it take to move off of your backup? Here's the next question here. Do you see the Broncos keeping 2 QBs on the 53, or do you see them keeping 3 the way that they did here in 2024?
Well, because of the fact that they didn't trade either Stidham or Wilson, which I thought was a foregone conclusion after training camp was over. I'm like, well, they got to trade one of these guys because somebody's going to give a mid-round pick. Like, injuries happen all over the place in the NFL. Yeah. Nobody traded for either of those guys.
Miami should have traded for Zach Wilson.
I don't understand why they did, or Stidham for that matter. I mean, that would have been better than the alternative because they cut I think they went into the season with Skylar Thompson as the backup and they just straight up cut him. So there's so many teams
back Skylar Thompson.
I mean, hey, that's the QB1 in Pittsburgh right now. So I don't know, Cody. I could see it going either way because on the one hand, you love this idea of, man, another reclamation project. You can develop these quarterbacks. They're not going to be stealing reps from Bo Nix. It's going to be an interesting offseason from that perspective, by the way, because Bo Nix is going to get all the first team reps this year, unlike last year. But I think that's a situation where you just, it's like Sam Darnold going to San Francisco, right? He didn't have to do anything, and he made $10 million the next offseason from the Vikings because of connections, because of talent, because of age. I like the idea of the Broncos benefiting in that way in the compensatory formula. So in that way, I view quarterbacks as currency in the NFL, and I would love to see the Broncos add a third guy, but I'm not opposed to saying, hey, if you like a guy late in the draft or after the draft, that will be able to sneak onto the practice squad, that you don't have to carry on the 53-man roster. I wouldn't be opposed to that idea either.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's an interesting one too. And the more I look at it, it's like, all right, do you really want to draft a guy? Probably not. Your capital could be used elsewhere. But as we see, there are players that have talent that go undrafted, and certainly they're not, not looking for the next Cinderella story, but can you be a capable backup here in the NFL? Certainly you've seen that in the NFL. Historically, you've seen guys be able to do just that. My next question here that we're going to shift to here is, all right, if the Broncos don't decide to go with Zach Wilson or Jarrett Stidham, I'm going to give you 3 names here. And Broncos Country, play along. And don't get mad at me for one, because we're looking at maybe play style or connection. There are 2 players here with connection to Sean Payton. Teddy Bridgewater, who's the backup, obviously, in Detroit. They loved him in Detroit. I mean, he just coached high school. He didn't play all year. He coached high school football, won a state title, and then signed with the Lions right before the playoffs, was the backup, and got in this past weekend's game on Saturday against the Commanders because Jared Goff got his bell rung. And, I mean, could command the offense there. From a trait standpoint, he's not going to replicate anything that Bo Nix does, but he can execute some of the simple things here. Okay, so there's Teddy Bridgewater as one. Drew Lock, which, look, I'm not trying to start a controversy here, Broncos Country, so don't get mad at me and say, why is this guy bringing up Drew Lock? He helped the Broncos get into the playoffs by beating the Colts, 5 touchdowns. We didn't see that coming there from him. But strictly as a backup, would it hurt, right? I think that's really where Drew Lock's ceiling is. He's not going to be a starter in the NFL, but can he be a solid backup? Maybe, maybe not. We'll see. Third name here. Where do you think I'm going with this one?
Ooh, I don't know. I mean, let's see here. I mean, we could be talking about maybe I don't know. I mean, Jameis. Are you going Jameis, Cody? I mean,
that's the one.
I just think I like these ideas. This is the type of stuff that's nice to be talking about, because we don't have to be saying who's going to be the bridge starter. Are they going to draft somebody? This, that. I like the idea of bringing it. I'm so open-minded right now, Cody, that I would even throw guys like, I know he hasn't played well, but I would even throw Trey Lance in there if Sean Payton wants to replicate the Taysom Hill offense. Like, I don't understand why the Cowboys didn't do any of that stuff. That was really foolish of them, in my opinion, because he's so good at running the ball. He's got such great speed. Why would you not try something like that? And hey, if you believe that you can develop guys, go get a guy like that. But out of those 3 that you mentioned, Cody, I'm here for the chaos. Number 3, Drew Lock.
Yeah.
He's gonna have to wear a different jersey number because Will Lutz has that number now. But I'm all for it. Like, who cares at this point? Like, stylistically speaking, he could probably run your offense. And yes, there's a high variance with the interceptions, but that same thing exists with Zach Wilson. That was his issue, was turning the ball over. So I feel like, why not? If you get a chance to bring in a third quarterback, maybe Drew Lock is that guy.
I would go with Jameis Winston, and that variance that you just spoke of exists here with Jameis Winston as well. He says, "Deliver me from these. I want the Lord to deliver me from these pick sixes." Remember Jameis? Wasn't he 30-30 the year before he went to the Saints? Right? And obviously he ended up getting LASIK. I don't know if that had anything to do with it, but he threw 30 touchdowns. He threw 30 interceptions. Like, my goodness. But then with Sean Payton, I mean, man, Jameis looked incredible. He looked entirely different. He looked more confident. And obviously, Broncos saw firsthand what Jameis can look like when he's really feeling it. And of course, like, you're going to get the variance with the turnovers there and things like that. But the hope is that this guy's never going to have to play for you. But if he has to, you're going to get something serviceable, probably better than almost anybody else out there at this point. So, fun little exercise here, Broncos Country. As Sayre said earlier, it's nice that we don't have to be sitting here looking back at the quarterback position in 2024 and saying, all right, who are the Broncos going to go with at QB in 2025? What does the backup quarterback situation potentially look like? That is really the biggest question surrounding this position. So if you were the general manager, how would you address the backup QB position behind Nix this season? Make sure you let us know here on Locked On Broncos. That's the first installment of our position recap series from 2024 and a look ahead at 2025. Tomorrow's episode, for all you everydayers, we're going to look at the running back position. What did it produce in 2024? What are the biggest questions about this position going into 2025? And is that solution, is that answer to that question already on the roster, or is it elsewhere? We'll break that down and much more on tomorrow's episode, Locked On Broncos.